It will come as a surprise to absolutely nobody that one of the topics that I am so looking forward to in 2020 Formula 1 is driver transfers. I mean, it's a topic we all find fascinating every single year in Formula 1. But with the 2021 regulations looming, I have a funny feeling that this year it could be extra spicy, extra saucy indeed. And today, our main topic of conversation is driver contracts. More importantly, how long have drivers got left on their contract? Of late, in the world of Formula 1, we have seen both Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen, who drive for Ferrari and Red Bull, they have both signed long-term deals. But how many other drivers actually have contracts? Well, the answer is not very many at the end of this season, which makes you wonder how many are going to be moving and shaking in that transfer market. Are drivers going to take a gamble like we saw in the last big regulation change back in 2014 that really helped out drivers like Lewis Hamilton and hindered other drivers that potentially didn't get the move they were looking for? Fernando Alonso, for example, when he moved to McLaren a year later in 2015, that definitely didn't quite pay off as he expected. So that whole psychology about whether a driver should move, whether they should stay at a team, is super fascinating. But this year in particular, with a huge regulation change next year, is going to be brilliant. But enough waiting. If you're new around here, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Feel free to subscribe, and let's jump into our first driver. Quick note, the order I'm going to do this is start with the drivers who have long contracts and then work it down to the drivers who have barely any contracts. I think that's the best way of doing it. And starting off with a driver who, in all honesty, we don't really know how big his contract is, but I'm going to assume it's pretty big. It's Lance Stroll. No surprise. I mean, this is not a big surprise to many Formula 1 fans. We all know the story of Daddy Stroll and how he bought out Racing, or Force India it was, at the time, and how they've evolved into Racing Point. The team have Sergio Perez as their team leader, and Lance Stroll, who, to be fair to him, has scored a Formula 1 podium, albeit in quite unique circumstances. He's performed okay in his first 3 years of Formula 1, driving 2 of those seasons for Williams, and last year with Racing Point, his first year with the team. But I find it very unlikely to see him moving elsewhere. I mean, he could shock everyone and show up next year being one of the quickest drivers, improve so much over the winter. I don't personally see that as a realistic thing to happen, but it could potentially happen. But Lance, we don't know how long he's going to be with that team, but I think it is very safe to say it's going to be a long time. It would take a real special driver potentially moving to the team. So, for example, if the team nailed the 2021 regulations, they had Perez and decided, we might need someone else potentially. Nah, even then I don't see it. I think Stroll will be with Racing Point for a very long time. The rest of our drivers, though, I'm happy to report we have dates. We have the final years of their contract. And the first official driver that we know how long his contract is and who is signed up for the longest is Charles Leclerc. Now, this was a deal that was only recently sorted between himself and Ferrari, and it makes total sense. Ferrari are putting almost all their eggs in one basket. I'm sure there's a few with Sebastian Vettel still, but the majority of Ferrari's bets now are with Charles Leclerc, and that makes total sense. Whilst he didn't destroy Sebastian Vettel in 2019, I would argue he was the better of the two. Of course, got the record for most pole positions last year, scored more points than his well-experienced Formula 1 teammate. But the more pressing factor, I believe, Ferrari focused on when deciding to arrange this contract was his age. Only 22 years old, and already he is showing plenty of signs that he is World Championship material. So it makes total sense to sign this guy up in the long term, because even if Sebastian Vettel bounces back and he's the better of the two next year, I don't really see that happening, but that's definitely a debate for another day. Even if Vettel does over the next few years comfortably lead that team, Leclerc is still a brilliant driver to have as a number 2. Proven he can win races this year, get pole positions quick on a Saturday and Sunday, and I would say has definitely grown and developed over 2019. There were silly little mistakes we saw at the beginning of the year, weren't as often at the end of the year. So development is definitely occurring. A driver who I believe will be world champion one day. Makes 100% total sense to sign him up in the long term, to stop rivals like Mercedes, like Red Bull, pulling him away. Not that I think they would be able to do that anyway, considering he's driving with Ferrari. Makes sense. All parties involved. 2024, quite a distance, but it makes sense. Our second driver and our only driver signed up till 2023 happened very recently, Max Verstappen. The Orange Army were loving the start of the new year, with Verstappen being signed up for an additional 4 more seasons. Hey, he's quick. He is very quick. Verstappen has proved he is comfortably in the top 2 drivers in Formula 1 at the moment, and definitely on his way to fighting Hamilton for that crown. And I have that gut feeling that he really could be in the championship fight this year. I mean, hey, there was debate at the summer break after a brilliant spring of form in the late stages of the European rounds that maybe Verstappen could go on and challenge Hamilton last season. Of course, then Belgium and Monza at the very end of the European season wasn't brilliant, and actually his second half of the year let him down a little bit, but he was still great. Performances in Brazil and actually Abu Dhabi as well were very, very impressive. And if Red Bull can continue their development, if Verstappen can keep growing like he has been able to, and that's a scary thought, by the way, thinking that Verstappen could get better because he's already world-class talent, makes sense to sign him at long term. We did a full video about it, so I don't need to go into too much detail. 2023, again, a little bit like Leclerc, it's a long deal, but when you've got a superstar, makes total sense. Up next, the only driver signed up till 2022, Lance Stroll's teammate, Sergio Perez. I find this really interesting, actually, mainly down to the fact that Racing Point, the only team I will let you know that have their drivers pretty much confirmed. I mean, Stroll, like I said earlier, that's a little bit of nothing really, but the only team that have both drivers secured past the end of 2020, which is bonkers. But for a team that once were Jordan, then evolved a few years later into Spiker, into Force India, and had a bit of a bumpy road in the mid-2000s, but have now, and even actually a couple of years ago, Sergio Perez helping them go through that administration process when they had to be bought out by Lawrence Stroll. But they've always been very, very cunning. They've always been a team that have punched way above their weight, and Sergio Perez, since 2014, has been instrumental in this team's success, whether it's scoring podiums, helping them through that horrific 2018 summer, and even of late, in 2019. Stroll obviously came in this year, but Perez still continues to be that figurehead for the team. Hasn't got age on his side, but definitely has proven himself in Formula 1, worthy of being in Formula 1 comfortably, is a driver that can score points, can fight in the midfield, knows how to get his elbows out, and even sometimes go a little bit further. But hey, most of us love Sergio in Formula 1, definitely deserves his spot. And for a team like Racing Point that have a driver like Stroll strapped in for the long term, Perez is a perfect option to help the development of Stroll, but also just to make sure the team is picking up points. Sorry, Stroll fans. But our next driver is the last driver to be signed up past 2020. I told you this gets crazy today, and our final driver is Esteban Ocon. Signed a 2-year deal with Renault that starts 2020 and obviously ends 2021. The Mercedes driver who, I mean, it's all a little bit messy, the Esteban Ocon situation. He's still managed by Mercedes. He's not a Mercedes young driver anymore. He's a Renault driver, but his manager and his management team are Mercedes. But it's a little bit much for me, to be totally honest with you. But for the next 2 years, he's a Renault driver, so we don't have to sweat too much over the next 2 years. He's young, he's promising, he's proved himself in Formula 1, obviously sat out 2019. Is he quick enough to be world champion? We don't know. And actually going up against Daniel Ricciardo is going to be a brilliant test for him and a brilliant chance to prove his abilities in Formula 1. So I'm really looking forward to seeing his progress over the next few years, but it makes sense for Renault to have a little bit of stability over the next few years. Of course, we don't know what Ricciardo's going to do, and he is one of those drivers who is out of contract at the end of the year. Actually, here's all of them. Here is the rest of your drivers that are out of contract next year. Yes, everyone from Sebastian Vettel right down to the two Williams boys, everybody. And also, yeah, just for reference, this isn't really in an order from here on out. As you'll see, Hamilton and Bottas, 17th and 8th, it's just a random order. But all of these drivers are currently out of contract at the end of the year. And I probably just should add in a bit of a side note. Contracts aren't necessarily concrete in the world of Formula One. We have seen plenty of times drivers who have long contracts be tempted away with nice sums of money. So in the grand scheme of things, they're a little bit wishy-washy, like in all sports. And of course, there are performance clauses on both the team's behalf and the driver's half. So again, things can be played with and messed around for drivers to swap. But in 2020, that doesn't really need to happen. What I also would say is that I'm expecting quite a few drivers quite early on in the season to sign up more deals. I'm looking at the likes of Lando Norris. I think he will get a multi-year deal. I'm also looking at the likes potentially Alex Albon and Pierre Gasly. But apart from those three drivers, I honestly feel, and perhaps even including those three drivers, I feel all of the rest of the grid could potentially be moving in 2021. So now you can understand why I'm so looking forward to the transfers this year. And I think this is definitely going to be one that I will probably do plenty of videos over the year, but it's just so fascinating. Sebastian Vettel, we might as well go through the order. What a year he's got on his hands. Of course, his last year under contract at Ferrari. Will Ferrari decide to keep him on? Of course, he's got plenty of experience, has been with Ferrari now for several years since 2015, but 2019 wasn't great. If he has another year like 2019, will Ferrari even decide to keep him on? Will they bring up a youngster from Formula 2? There's, I believe, currently 5 drivers in Formula 2 that are Ferrari juniors next year. That's going to be playing on their minds a little bit. Will they try and steal someone else? When you look at all the other drivers that are out of contract, Carlos Sainz, Daniel Ricciardo, Lewis Hamilton, why don't Ferrari offer them a contract? Sainz himself at McLaren and Lando Norris, what a brilliant pairing they've been together. But if someone like Ferrari, like Mercedes comes knocking, what happens then? Again, I think Norris probably will sign a few more season contract. That kind of makes sense. But Carlos Sainz, his move to McLaren, in the grand scheme of things, has done him wonders for his stock in the world of Formula One. And I think he was probably a driver a few seasons ago that wasn't quite on the radar of a Ferrari, of a Mercedes. I think that's changed. I seriously think that's changed in 2019. And of course, that podium in Brazil definitely helped him out there. Alex Albon and the two Toro Rosso boys, we don't really know what's going to happen there. I think Albon's going to be comfortable in that Red Bull seat. I really do. And I think my video I did a couple of days ago, I think perhaps came across in perhaps the wrong light in regard to my opinion of Alex Albon, because I think Red Bull have got a very strong driver there, and I really hope he can continue the development he proved in his first season of Formula One. So I don't think there'll be too much moving and shaking from Alex. Likewise with Gasly. But what about Danny Kvyat? Will he want to be in another season at Toro Rosso, or will he look elsewhere? Driver number 10 on our list, Daniel Ricciardo. Blimey. He's such an interesting case study. We've spoken in length about him as well a few days ago, I think a couple of weeks ago now, in our first year in yellow video. I personally believed he moved to Renault to open up his options for 2021. Will Renault be brilliant? Will they go backwards again this year? I mean, it's so interesting. The two Alfa Romeo boys. What's going to happen there? Of course, Kimi Räikkönen. We had a chat in our weekly mailbox a few days ago. I wasn't trying to just plug other videos, but we spoke about Kimi Räikkönen because he's a driver who seems to have really found his love again for Formula One. Does he want to walk away now? If he didn't walk away in 2016, 2017, 2018, he stayed because he loves the sport. what a brilliant opportunity if Giovinazzi doesn't stay and a Ferrari young driver comes into that team. What a brilliant mentor Raikkonen could be for a young driver like a Mick Schumacher, like a Robert Schwartzman, Marcus Armstrong, any of those that are in Formula 2 or the younger categories. Raikkonen can be a real special talent there. A team, of course, I'm going to be keeping my eye on for sure is Haas F1. Romain Grosjean and Kevin Magnussen have had their moments in Formula 1 and with Haas. Magnussen really struggled in his first year with the team and was kind of lucky to be retained for 2018, but made it very clear in 2018 he was up to the level and made Grosjean in 2018 look like a bit of a rookie. Both of them had okay 2019s. The car wasn't great, but neither of those two really shone out in that midfield. I think both of them could potentially be moved on for 2021, depends how rocky this year is. Grosjean in particular, I think, is on very, very thin ice. We'll have to wait and see what happens, but I definitely think there'll be at least one change, if not two changes, at that team. And I think drivers like Danny Kvyat could potentially be eyeing Haas as a potential move for 2021. We spoke about Gasly, we spoke about Danny Kvyat for the most part, moving on to Mercedes and Williams. Who knows what's happening with Williams, whether they will move forward, whether they'll move further back. Blimey, sorry Williams fans, I actually don't hope that happens because it's not been a brilliant few seasons for you. Russell and Latifi as well only got 1 year left on their contract. Or well, Russell has and Latifi has only got a 1 year deal. I'm not too sure about Latifi. Again, he could be one of those drivers that jumps into Formula 1 and performs straight away, really gets on with the car, and I really hope for Williams fans they have two world-class drivers in that car next year. I really rate George Russell, but I think with Russell, and this is kind of why I put Mercedes and Williams together, I think he is going to be in that Mercedes alongside Lewis Hamilton in 2021. And actually, scrap that, I just think he'll be in the Mercedes in 2021. Whether it's alongside Bottas or Hamilton remains to be seen, because if Hamilton goes, Bottas stays. If Hamilton stays, Bottas goes. I really do believe that, because it's getting to the stage now where George Russell can't be at Williams forever. A seat might open up elsewhere, a little bit like Mercedes have dealt with Renault this year with Esteban Ocon. But I think Russell is a special driver. Of course, Mercedes will have much more data behind the scenes with the test he does at the end of the season and might do a few tests again in 2020. But I think Russell will be on the move. But again, Russell could move to a team like Haas on a 1 year contract. Hamilton himself, does he really want another challenge elsewhere? I mean, Mercedes have been so good over this hybrid era. If Hamilton wins 7 championships with his 7th overall and his 6th with Mercedes, will he want to stay there, or will he want to try and claim that 8th championship with another team? Take a gamble on a Ferrari, or even move back to a McLaren. We just don't know. But Hamilton is definitely going to be a driver who's going to be in plenty of headlines over the course of 2020. And I think that's it. I didn't want to go in too much detail today because it's just a number. It really is. And if I was to go into real length about all these drivers, we would be here for much longer than 20 minutes. Actually, this is a lot longer than I expected to do today's video anyway. And what makes this even more crazy is that we do have world-class talent coming through the ranks in Formula 2. We do have drivers such as Nico Hülkenberg, Fernando Alonso, waiting on the sidelines. I would love to see more teams enter in 2021, and it still is yet to be seen whether a team does take the gamble and make a last-minute lunge into the sport in 2021. I find it unlikely, but we could potentially see it happen. Who knows? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Something a little bit different, talking about contracts, but it was one of those things that I stumbled across a few days ago and thought, wow, that's interesting. I'd like everyone to know about this as well. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you're new around here and you did enjoy, feel free to subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.